Welcome back to Bunny Trail Central, uh, Psalm 1, still. But we're in the last verse. I can't make any big, grand promises that we're going to nail it out today. But there's a chance. There's also the chance that we're going to chase a couple of bunnies down the bunny trail. Uh, the last verse, verse 6. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction. This is, again, remember how I talked about the structure and form of Hebrew poetry? You have this balance. The Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction. So, you have that balance, this and that, oppositionally. Okay. The Lord watches over the way of the righteous. We're going to kind of pull that apart. I talked last time about the idea that the Lord watching over the way of the wicked. This is not the Lord observes the way. This is not the Lord is a spectator of the way of the righteous. It's bigger than that. And in my opinion, it's much better than that. For us, the idea is not only does he observe our ways, which he does, the concept of watching over is the idea is that of provision and protection, so that the Lord, as he watches our way, intervenes on our behalf. Does he always? Does he always keep me from a struggle or from harm? Well, no. That is not the concept. And here's why. I do not get to decide for God when he will step in and intervene. I can ask him to. I can pray for his intervention. That's a good thing. And I would even say that's a very smart thing. But I don't get to tell him when he should. Because here's bottom line on why is that? Because I'm not smart enough to know. I don't see the future. I can't put my life in its full and total context. Only he can. There are times when he steps in, I can't explain it. It's just his grace and his mercy, expressions of his love. And then there are other times where he doesn't step in, and I can't explain that either. It feels as though he's not watching somehow. That I'm experiencing my life and thinking, you gotta help me here. But no help arrives. Often the help that arrives is not what I was looking for. Well, but the concept is God is watching over us, our ways, the way of the wicked. It could mean the path of the wicked, but more likely it has to do with our traveling on the path, what path we have chosen, and how we pursue that path. The way of the righteous. The way of the righteous would be a path that is bounded and defined by God's design. Here's why I say that. what does righteous mean? What's the definition of righteous? Well, it begins with the very first part of the word, right. Righteous is rightness. Now, don't mistake that with perfectionism. Don't mistake it with stubborn legalism. This is not self-righteousness. This is simply righteousness. Okay, so how right do I have to be to fit in this category? Because on one hand, rightness is difficult to quantify and to judge objectively. How often do I need to be right? How right do I need to be? And against what? What is the standard for right? Well, here, that one's fairly easy to answer. The standard for rightness is God's design. Where do you find that? You find it in Scripture. I've told you I've been reading in my morning quiet time. I'm in the book of Leviticus, not my favorite book. A good bit of that book is about what to do when you sin, or when, and one of my ahas from this time through, this is like my 33rd time through, and I'm barely getting it anymore. But here's one thing I saw. Even unintentional sins, even when I didn't know I sinned, when I'm guilty, and when I find out, when I discover I've sinned, then I have to take steps. God, He is our creator and designer. He knows we are not going to be able to pull off this perfect righteousness. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to sin. And so, these passages out of the book of Leviticus that describe the sacrifice for sin and the atonement that it provides, they address the fact that God knows you're going to sin. And when you sin, something has to be done to pay for that sin. Okay. In the Old Testament, before Jesus, before his death, burial, and resurrection, the law was binding, and it provided a means of being reconciled to God, and the payment for sin. But today that is moot, because the full and final payment for sin has already been made in the form of Jesus and his death, the blood he shed on the cross. So that sets us up on this side of the cross to view this idea of the way of the righteous differently than those who lived on the other side of the cross, the BC, before Christ. For us, the way of the righteous does not involve us taking a lamb, a goat, an ox, pigeons, or doves to the temple to be butchered and then burnt as sacrifices to atone for our sin. One of the most profound ideas truths. This is not just a concept. This is an actual truth from the New Testament, is that Jesus has made us righteous. The technical term is he has imputed righteousness to us. He has made us righteous. He has given us his righteousness. That's a little hard to get your hands around. Because in my mind, I read that, and it's taken me some years, but I basically get the idea. I'm just not sometimes seeing how that is me. I am made righteous by Christ. I don't make effort to be made righteous with Christ. This is important. It is his grace that makes me righteous. But don't mistake, Dietrich Bonhoeffer would have, I think, said, don't cheapen grace by feeling and believing and acting as if, because God made you righteous, you don't have to, there's no effort now. You don't worry about it. Just do what you want. You've already been made righteous. That's not how grace works. God, through his grace, imputes the righteousness of Christ upon us. He gives us the perfect righteousness of Jesus. And as a result of that gift of grace, my response, to me, it seems like my response must be to follow his design out of gratitude. I mean, there are times when I look at God's design and I think, well, it makes total sense. It's the only way life works. And then there are other times where God's design gets in the way of my desire. I don't like it at that point. I want what I want. But when I can be reminded and have it in my mind and in my heart, a remembrance of the fact that Jesus made me righteous, He did that, not me. My response is in gratitude. I live, my way is governed by his design. So the Lord watches over the way of the righteous. Remember that. If you grew up in church, you probably, when you were a little kid, well, maybe they don't do it anymore. I don't know. I haven't been in a little kids class in ages, but used to, there was that song, "Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Careful, little hands, what you do. Oh, be careful, little feet, where you go. For the Father up above is looking down in love. So be careful, little eyes, hands, feet." Yeah, the Father's watching. He's not watching so that he can spank you and catch you. Sorry. Catch you when you step out of line. He's watching over you. How would I live today embracing that truth? That's God's grace. That is watching by his grace. Because of his grace, in his grace, he watches over me. Well, something to ponder. See you next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.